The flight attendant rips the tickets, rolling her eyes, then snaps at them. "You do not belong in first class. Get up and move to the back, now." The father remains calm, but firm. "These are first-class tickets, ma'am." She scoffs, laughing mockingly as other passengers watch in silence. "I know exactly who belongs here. Move, or I'll call security." Suddenly, a chilling announcement echoes through the plane. Passengers gasp. Let's see what happens next. The scent of fresh brewed coffee and warm croissants filled the air as passengers slowly made their way onto the plane. The sleek white interior of the luxury aircraft gleamed under the soft cabin lights. It was a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles, and passengers were settling into their seats, adjusting their pillows, and checking their phones one last time before takeoff. Among them was David Carter, a tall, well-dressed black man in his late 30s. His tailored navy blue suit complemented his confident yet humble demeanor. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt as he turned to help his wife, Monica, settle into her seat. Monica, an elegant woman with deep brown skin and soft, expressive eyes, looked radiant in a stylish yet comfortable outfit. She sighed with relief as she finally sat down, brushing a hand over her silk blouse. But the real star of the trip was their daughter, Ava, a bright-eyed, curious 8-year-old. Her curly pigtails bounced as she excitedly peered out the window, mesmerized by the rows of twinkling airport lights stretching across the runway. This was her first time flying first class, and she couldn't contain her excitement. "Daddy, look, the seats are so big!" She giggled, running her small fingers over the plush leather armrests. David chuckled. "I told you, sweetheart, first class is special. We worked hard for this." Monica reached over and squeezed his hand. She knew how much this trip meant to him. David had worked tirelessly to build his company from the ground up, and this vacation was a well-earned celebration of their success. It was the first time in years that they had been able to take a break together as a family. As they settled in, a flight attendant strutted down the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Claire Whitman had been a flight attendant for years, and she prided herself on maintaining order in the cabin. She glanced around, scrutinizing the passengers, ensuring everything looked exactly as it should. And then she saw them. A flicker of disapproval flashed across her face as she noticed David and his family in the first-class section. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she adjusted her uniform, stepping forward with forced politeness. "Excuse me," Claire said, her voice sharp but coated with fake courtesy. "Can I see your tickets, please?" David looked up, momentarily surprised. He reached into his suit pocket and handed her the printed tickets. Claire barely glanced at them before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake. This is first-class seating." Monica furrowed her brows. "Yes, we know. These are our assigned seats." Claire let out a small laugh, one that wasn't meant to be funny. "You must have been upgraded by accident. I'll have to ask you to move to your correct seats in economy." Passengers nearby turned their heads. The tension in the air was palpable. David inhaled deeply, keeping his composure. "There's no mistake. We purchased these seats." Claire's smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Sir, please, I don't want to make this difficult, but I know who is supposed to be in first class and—" "And what?" Monica cut in, her voice tight with anger. Claire hesitated, glancing around as if looking for backup. "I just mean, I have a system, and this is highly unusual. I don't want to cause any inconvenience, but I must follow procedures." "Mommy, why is she asking us to move?" Ava's small voice broke through the tension, her innocent eyes darting between the adults. Monica exhaled sharply, her patience thinning. "Sweetheart, it's okay. We belong here." David met Claire's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Miss, I don't know what system you have, but our tickets are valid, and we are staying in our seats." The muscles in Claire's jaw tightened. It was clear she wasn't used to being challenged. Her face twisted with irritation as she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Sir, I'm trying to do my job. If you don't cooperate, I will have to call security." At that moment, a passenger in the row behind them, an older white man in a business suit, cleared his throat. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I mean, you don't see this very often." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. David clenched his jaw. He wasn't just fighting for a seat. He was fighting for his dignity, his family's dignity. He had experienced this kind of subtle discrimination before, but never in front of his daughter. He wouldn't let her grow up believing she had to justify her presence in places she rightfully belonged. Monica, seeing the distress in Ava's face, squared her shoulders. She wasn't just going to let this happen. "Call security if you want," she said, her voice icy. "But we are not moving." Claire's nostrils flared, and for a brief moment she seemed uncertain about what to do next. Then, with a sharp nod, she spun on her heel and stormed toward the cockpit. Passengers whispered among themselves as a chilling silence settled over the first-class cabin. David exhaled, trying to steady his breath. "Stay calm," he muttered to himself. "Just stay calm." Ava looked up at him, eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" David forced a reassuring smile, brushing a curl from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." But as the flight crew exchanged hushed whispers near the cockpit, it was clear. Something big was about to happen. The hum of the airplane's engines filled the cabin, but the tension in first class was louder than any sound. David could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him and his family. Monica kept her jaw clenched, her fingers gripping the armrest so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Ava, sensing the unease but not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, clung to her stuffed bunny and watched her parents for reassurance. Meanwhile, Claire stormed toward the front of the plane, her heels clicking with determination. Her face was flushed with frustration as she reached the flight crew's station near the cockpit. "They refuse to move," she hissed to her co-worker, a younger flight attendant named Rachel. Rachel frowned. "Did you check their tickets?" Claire scoffed. "Of course I did. But you know how some people are. They probably snuck in during boarding or got an upgrade they didn't deserve. Either way, they don't belong here." Rachel hesitated. "I mean, if they have first-class tickets—" "That's not the point," Claire cut in sharply. "I know who usually sits in first class, and it's not them. I don't have time to argue. Just get the captain." Rachel bit her lip but nodded. She didn't want to get in trouble for questioning a senior attendant. Moments later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for departure. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are in the upright position." The plane had begun taxiing toward the runway, but Claire wasn't finished yet. She marched back down the aisle, stopping just short of David's seat. "Sir, this is your last warning," she said, her voice lower now but dripping with condescension. "Move to economy, or I will have the captain turn this plane around." The murmur of passengers grew louder. Some were whispering, others openly staring. A man in a crisp business suit adjusted his tie and muttered, "Just move already." "You're holding up the flight." David took a slow breath, his mind racing. He wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for Monica, for Ava, for every time they had been made to feel like they didn't belong. "We are not moving," he said, his voice steady but firm. Claire exhaled sharply, her patience gone. Without another word, she spun around and headed toward the front of the cabin. Then, just as she reached the intercom, the plane suddenly lurched to a stop. Passengers gasped as the motion jerked them forward in their seats. The lights flickered slightly. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as Claire picked up the phone connected to the cockpit. "Captain, what's going on?" The pilot's voice came through, calm but firm. "We've been instructed to return to the gate. Security is coming aboard." David felt his stomach drop. Monica's eyes widened in disbelief. "Security," she whispered. Ava whimpered, shrinking into her seat. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" David placed a hand on her shoulder, his heart pounding. "No, baby. Everything is going to be okay." But inside, he wasn't so sure. A few minutes later, the jet bridge connected to the plane, and the cabin door opened. Two uniformed security officers stepped inside, their expressions unreadable. Behind them, the airline supervisor, a woman with short, graying hair, scanned the cabin with a professional but detached look. Claire wasted no time stepping forward. "These passengers are refusing to cooperate," she said, crossing her arms. The lead officer turned to David. "Sir, we've received a report that you are refusing to follow crew instructions. We need to ask you to step off the plane." Monica's breath hitched. "You can't be serious." "Ma'am, we're simply following protocol," the supervisor said. Passengers were openly staring now. A woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "This is getting ridiculous." The businessman behind them scoffed. "I knew something like this would happen." David could feel his hands shaking, but he willed himself to stay composed. He glanced at Monica, then at Ava, whose little face was scrunched up in fear. "I'm not leaving this plane," he said. "We paid for these seats." The lead officer sighed. "Sir, if you don't comply, we will be forced to escort you off." Claire smirked slightly, standing a little taller. This was exactly what she had wanted, to make an example out of them. The tension was suffocating. Then, a voice broke through the silence. "Excuse me, but this is wrong." Everyone turned to look at the speaker, a middle-aged white woman sitting a few rows away. She looked furious. "I saw everything," she said. "They showed their tickets. They belong here." Another voice joined in. "Yeah, this is discrimination, and we all know it." A ripple of agreement spread through the cabin. Claire's smirk disappeared. "This has nothing to do with—" The supervisor raised a hand, signaling her to stop. She turned to the officers. "Hold on." She took a breath, then looked directly at David. "Sir, would you be willing to show me your tickets again?" David reached into his pocket and handed them over, his fingers tightening slightly as he did. The supervisor examined them carefully. Then, after a long pause, she sighed. "Their tickets are valid. They are first-class passengers." The entire cabin fell into stunned silence. Monica let out a sharp breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Claire's face drained of color. "Then why did you call security?" one of the other passengers asked. The question hung heavy in the air. The supervisor turned to Claire, her expression unreadable. "That's a good question." Claire's mouth opened, then closed again. David exhaled slowly. He didn't need to say a word. Justice had already started working its way through the air, but this wasn't over yet. The air inside the cabin felt heavy. A thick silence lingered as the passengers processed what had just happened. The security officers, clearly uncomfortable, exchanged looks before stepping aside. The airline supervisor, her face unreadable, turned back to David and his family. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding." David studied her expression. It was the kind of corporate apology that came only after being exposed. He nodded slightly, his posture firm, but he wasn't ready to let this go just yet. "A misunderstanding?" Monica finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "Number A misunderstanding is when someone gets your name wrong. This was something else entirely." Claire shifted uncomfortably, her once confident smirk completely gone. The entire plane was still watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The supervisor hesitated, then sighed. "You're absolutely right, and this situation will be addressed immediately." She turned to Claire, her voice dropping in temperature. "Flight Attendant Whitman, you and I will be having a conversation when we land." Claire's face went pale. "I was just doing my job," she protested. "No, you weren't," the supervisor interrupted. "You singled out a family based on your assumptions, and you escalated the situation unnecessarily. That's not what we stand for." David watched as Claire's entire demeanor shifted from arrogance to panic. The realization had hit her. She was in serious trouble. "Wait, please," she started, but the supervisor held up a hand. "I suggest you return to your station and remain professional for the rest of the flight. We'll deal with this later." Claire's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but under the weight of the situation, she simply nodded stiffly and walked away, her shoulders tense. Passengers murmured in quiet approval. Some even clapped. Monica turned to David. He reached for her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "Daddy, are we still in trouble?" Ava's small voice broke the moment. David crouched down to meet his daughter's gaze, brushing a curl from her face. "No, baby. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Ava tilted her head. "Then why did that lady say we had to move?" David exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Because sometimes people don't like seeing others in places they think they don't belong." Ava's innocent eyes studied him. "But we did belong here." David smiled softly. "That's right. And now you'll always remember. You never let anyone tell you where you do or don't belong." Monica blinked rapidly, holding back tears. A woman seated nearby, the same passenger who had spoken up earlier, leaned forward. "Your daughter is lucky to have parents like you," she said. David nodded, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, Monica settled back into her seat. She looked at her husband, then down at Ava, who had returned to staring out the window, her mind surely swirling with thoughts. David took a deep breath and let his gaze wander around the cabin. Some passengers still glanced their way, but this time, it wasn't with doubt. It was with recognition. They had stood their ground. Justice had been served. Discrimination and bias often hide behind small, seemingly insignificant moments. But those moments matter. Every act of standing up for yourself, of refusing to be pushed aside, sends a message that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background, their skin color, or where they come from. This wasn't just about a first-class seat. It was about something much bigger. It was about belonging. Did this story move you? If so, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge injustice and inspire change. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let's stand together for what's right. Subscribe now and be part of the movement.